Hey, I'm Jordan, and this is the Bible and Archaeology podcast, the place for conversations and questions about the Bible, its lands, civilizations, and archaeology. Today, Bob and I wanted to turn our attention to one of Israel's most famous kings, King David, to tackle the events that accompany the last days of King David's reign. What do we know about King David in his final days? How secure is the kingdom and the succession? Does the right person end up on the throne, or is this succession actually a coup? And just how much of 1 Kings' version of events should we trust? We cover it all. Remember, for weekly bonus episodes, early access to ad-free video podcasts, and exclusive bonus content, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/BibleandArc. So settle in, and I hope you enjoy our conversation all about the last days of King David. All right, Bob. So today we have an interesting topic. I think a topic everyone thinks, again, one of those everyone thinks they know how this goes.
Right.
The death of King David, and with the death of King David, the rise of King Solomon. We're comfortable with the idea that David was king and Solomon becomes king next.
Yeah.
Comfortable might be the wrong word depending on how well you know this narrative, though.
I'm comfortable with that. There are still some people who think that David never existed, but
right.
We're
not going down that path.
Let's dismiss that. You kind of call him a chieftain, you want to call him whatever. There was some people that called themselves the sons of David. We have this in the inscription. Let's go ahead and assert that there was a David. Can we please? All right. Now, Solomon, it gets a little dicey. We have it here in the narrative, but there's some more questions about Solomon than about David.
There are a number of questions about Solomon. We'll get into some of them today when we're talking about what happens at the end of David's life and how Solomon ends up on the throne, because it's by no means a clean process. I think that common understanding that, David is king and then Solomon is king that most people have makes it seem like there's a nice, clean succession, like Chronicles tells us.
No, but see, Chronicles, here's one thing we have to remember. Take two Bibles, turn one of them to 1 Samuel and take one of them to 1 Chronicles, and then read 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings. 1 and 2 Chronicles rewrites and retells the stories of 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings. Now, most people who've studied the Bible regularly know this. So just like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, Goodacre would have some disputes about
is
this.
John synoptic? Go and see that podcast.
Right. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell the same story. They're different retellings of the similar story. Chronicles is a telling of the same story told in Samuel and Kings, but it cleans some things up. It
cleans a lot of things.
I'm being generous.
Yeah.
It cleans some things up, and a lot of these contradictions, a lot of these
uncomfortable moments,
changes, these discrepancies that we have within them are because of Chronicles and Samuel and Kings. Differences in the number of plates or differences in the numbers of troops. But there's also some very significant things that are added to or left out or just changes that are made for theological purposes between Chronicles and 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings. So just know that Chronicles is written later and is retelling the story of Samuel and Kings. So first of all, that's a truth that's going on. They weren't written at the same time. Chronicles has got Samuel and Kings in front of it and is rewriting it. Okay. Now, when it comes to the changes that are made to this story, there is a lot of scholarly debate because it wasn't just a clean, hey, this is my son and I'm handing off the throne to him.
Far from clean.
There was a Game of Thrones thing going on here.
Yeah, so we're going to be focusing on the 1 Kings account of the last days of David.
Right.
And the rise of King Solomon, because you can't really do one without looking at the other. And so as we're just going to walk through the text here a little bit, because I think you got to look through all of this.
Right.
Starting in 1 Kings 1 with the description of David's final days going through his death. And so if we're looking just at the beginning of 1 Kings 1, we get this story that David was old and advanced in years, and they covered him with clothes and he can't keep warm. And so what do? They bring him a woman named Abishag, who's going to be, the text calls, his attendant, that's going to serve him. But it makes clear the king did not know her sexually. And so This is a big change if you're thinking of David as David and Goliath, David the mighty warrior David. We're opening up kings, and suddenly David is a very old man.
Yeah, he's old, and let's be clear about what the text says, right? Let a young virgin be sought for my lord the king, and let her wait on the king and be his attendant. Let her lie in your bosom so that the Lord, my lord the king, may be warm.
May be warm.
Now, it's Iowa City. It's the middle of winter. It's 0 degrees outside. So I get it when it's, we have heating and, in the house, and we've got but this is antiquity, and he's old, and it's cold, much older than I am. And he's freezing, right? He cannot keep warm. And so they want to put this electric blanket named Abishag next to him, right? They're going to go get a woman, and her job is to sleep with him to keep him warm. And then the text says, but of course, the king did not know her sexually.
The sleep with him part is an important distinction, because as we go through all of this, as you're listening through the text, I think it is fair to ask the question of what does it say? What does it not say?
Yeah.
And when it really drives home a point, it makes sure to tell us here, he did not know her. He did not know her, which does become important later for a part of the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to ask you a question about what this is telling us about David, because we have that he's old and he's advanced and he can't warm himself.
Right.
He did not know her sexually. We also know David as a guy, David and Bathsheba, who has had some stories about interactions here. So
he has strayed in the past.
What version of David? Is this a change of David? What is this telling us about him as a king, as a ruler? Is this a warning that he doesn't have the power to be king anymore?
Well, it could be a couple of things. Maybe he doesn't have the power to be king. He also, how do you say it? He also may be lacking some other powers that he once had when he was a younger man. He may genuinely be a very old king who needs this electric blanket named Abishag, but he may not have, let us say, the young virility that he once had. And so he just needs someone to lie next to him, but not lie with him in the biblical sense.
But that isn't, if we're thinking about kingship,
right?
That's a part of within the biblical version of being king.
Well,
right?
You can know someone and not know someone, right? But when you're talking about the harem, and if we remember the story of Absalom, right? This whole thing about he takes King David's harem after he flees the palace, and he brings them all out on the balcony, and he does it in full daylight, right? What you did in secret, I will do in full daylight and in front of all Israel. And one of the things that you did in antiquity and beyond was that you slept with the previous king's harem, often your father's harem. So you bring out all the concubines, you bring out all the attendants, and you just know them. And this is a public way of saying, he ain't coming back. I am now the king.
Right.
Right. So this is just, I know it sounds crass, but this is what happened in antiquity. You are now with those who were closest to the previous king. And the previous king's either going to come back and kill me for doing this, or I'm the king, one or the other. So at the end of the day, whether or not King David was having sex with new sexually Abishag really doesn't matter. In his advanced age, this is the woman who was closest to him. This is his personal attendant. Mm-hmm. Her, the president always has a body man. This carries the president's bags and who's with him everywhere he goes. So it's a close person. Whether there's a relationship, a person, this is the person who the president, the king, the official trusts. This person can kill this person if they want. This is the closest person to them. And if that person is now violated or is being courted away or is somehow being like Absalom did with David's harem earlier, that would be seen as an affront. But for now, whether she's having sex with him or not, Abishag is the person who is quite literally closest to David.
So we've got David as old, advanced in years, cannot stay warm. A new character has been introduced to help him there, but a very different David than we had when he's fleeing from Saul. A very different David than fought Goliath, not the warrior king David anymore.
He's about to die, and it's time to find a successor.
which is, I think, an interesting thing to include with King David, given how much he gets a lot of screen time.
Yeah.
And so much of it is him as this powerful king, including a story about him in such a fallen state at the end, is an interesting thing to make it in.
He's still a virile king. So,
Maybe.
But I'm not now. I'm talking with Bathsheba, right? With David and Bathsheba. He's breaking all of these different commandments, but it's still showing his virility. Now, something else is going on in the story of David, and that is there are parts of the story of Samuel and Kings that are pro-monarchy and pro-Davidic, and there are other parts of the story that are anti-monarchy and that aren't necessarily in favor of David. So you just have to know that there are these two traditions, these two sources that are both kept and worked into the biblical text. So you've got these pro-Davidic stuff and you've got this anti-Davidic stuff. You've got this pro-monarchic stuff. Let's say it that way. You've got this pro-monarchic text and you've got these anti-monarchic texts, these texts that are pro-monarchy, and you've got this other group that doesn't like the monarchy. And so they're both there. Let's just acknowledge that they're both there.
Then if we keep going on, we have one character introduced here, and then we're going to get another name that connects back to her in a little bit, Adonijah. Adonijah, one of David's sons, who, we're told in verse 5, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. He prepared himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. And joining this group, he conferred with Joab, the priest Abiathar. They supported Adonijah, but the priest Zadok, Benaniah, and the prophet Nathan, and Shimei, and Ray, and David's own warriors did not. And so we have Adonijah here in the text very clearly seeming to try to Absalom him.
Right.
Because he's also described as being beautiful, but he's doing some of these same things that Absalom did, and he's running about saying, I will be king.
Why?
While David is still alive.
Yeah, but... So yes, it looks like it's a coup and he's trying to usurp the authority of David, but David's this close to death and he's the next son in line. He's the prince. He's the crown prince. He's the natural heir to the throne. He will be the king.
I think this is a question to ask here that normally this gets portrayed. It gets portrayed in the text when Nathan has some things to say later that this is a coup attempt, that there's the question, David, do you know about this? Do you know what's going on? Have you caused this to be so?
Correct.
And so is Adonijah stepping out of line and seeking to advance himself improperly? Or is this a normal end of the king's life, co-regency, you're the next going to be king?
Which happens. That's a thing that happens, co-regency.
Is this okay?
A king brings up his crown prince and starts giving him some authority and starts saying, I need you to learn the business.
He does it with Solomon.
I'm just saying, this is a thing that naturally happens. So I will be king, and Adonijah is the next in line. He's the crown prince, right? Or at least he thinks that he is. He's the natural. Absalom's gone.
In the line of succession, he is next.
Correct. He's next. And look who he's got supporting him. Joab, David's military chief. So it's nice if you've got the army on your side. So he's got that going for him in his column. He's got the priest Abiathar, right? So he's got basically the army and the army's commander, and he's got the priesthood on his side.
And he also has down below, he invites all of his brothers, the king's sons, the royal officials of Judah, although the Septuagint here has all the men of Judah. So is it just people from the court, or is it everyone of Judah?
The nobles.
Maybe the nobles. But there's unlike Absalom, who runs off to do some of this in private. He is doing this in public view with seeming public support.
It looks like it's the normal order, the standard order of things. So it looks less like a coup and it looks like the standard order of things. Now, is he doing it? Is he doing it prematurely? Is he doing it without David's knowledge? We don't know yet. But the rest of the King David's officials seem to be lining up to support the crown prince.
And the inclusion of Joab here is one moment when we're looking at this Absalom parallel, which First Kings really wants to emphasize the Absalom-Adonijah parallel. Joab was not on Team Absalom, in that rebellion.
Joab killed Absalom against David's wishes.
And so the inclusion of Joab in this faction that is supporting, because we do get two clear factions here of some of those insiders.
Right.
Not everyone is with Adonijah. Some of them are excluded. Among this is Nathan and Zadok, and there's groups that we read through there that don't make the cut.
And just remember, for those of you who are saying, wait a minute, I thought Abiathar was the priest. What's Zadok? This character of Zadok is introduced as this other priest. Remember, Abiathar and Zadok were priests. And so you see here now let's call it a split for now. So one of the priests, Abiathar, is going to support Adonijah. This other priest, right, where did he come from, is now supporting what will become Solomon, right? He's going to support Team Solomon. He's not going to support Adonijah. So you've got one priest that's going to support Adonijah, and you've got one that's not. He's going to play for this other team. Joab, the army commander, is going to go out and support Adonijah. So he's got a priest and the army, and Zadok the priest, and Benaiah, who will become this prominent character, is gonna support not Adonijah.
Right.
He's gonna.
Well, and there's a question in this splitting of groups, because right now we're just told that they get left out,
right,
or that they don't support him.
Right.
They end up, as you say, backing Solomon.
Right.
Is that out of necessity? Because removed from the Bible as theology and all of that. If we're looking at this as a political narrative, you already mentioned Game of Thrones earlier.
Mm-hmm.
In a Game of Thrones situation, the king is old.
Right.
There's going to be a candidate.
Right.
Maybe it's disputed, and Adonijah has some insiders. There's going to be a restructuring that happens if you're getting left out. Do you pick Solomon because they're the one that's supposed to be king, or do they pick Solomon out of necessity and then create a story to support that?
Or, and we have to put this possibility forward, as many scholars have, is this written after the fact to support what eventually happened? And that is, the guy who was supposed to become king, Adonijah, got offed by the guy who ended up usurping the throne. Let's use that word, usurping. Solomon took the throne and introduced us to these new characters who may have been filtered back into the text. So Zadok, who's this guy? But he's going to become the priest that supported the correct king, right?
They picked
Solomon. Benaiah, right? Nathan, David's personal court prophet, right? Is always with Solomon, is backing Solomon. And who's Solomon's mom? And this is the big thing. This is Bathsheba, the favorite wife.
So let's get to the Bathsheba part, because now we've got our factions. We've got an old king. We've got somebody claiming that I'm going to be king.
Right.
And we have Solomon and Bathsheba. Solomon is not invited. Out of the sons.
Right.
Which is interesting, because there are other sons who could be candidates, but we're told.
But they line up behind Adonijah. They line up because they know if they support the guy who's supposed to get the throne, then they're going to get a piece of the court, right? They're going to get some...
Or maybe just not die.
Or not get their head chopped off, right?
Yeah, but Solomon gets left out.
Right.
And so Nathan goes to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother.
Right.
And he asks her, have you heard what he is doing, what he's running around? So I'm going to give you some advice. And he says, so that you may save your life and the life of your son Solomon, go in to the king and say, did you not, my lord, the king, swear to your servant, saying, your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit on my throne. Why then is Adonijah king? And he says, while you're doing this, I'm going to come in and I'm going to repeat the same thing. And so that's what they do. And Nathan sends Bathsheba in. She goes in and tells the story. Then he comes in and repeats and says, have you said Adonijah shall succeed me? Have you done this without telling all of your servants? They're presenting a court confusion and putting David on the hot seat.
Yeah. Or did David actually ever... So the first thing we have to ask is this.
Did David say this?
Did David ever tell Bathsheba? Did he ever promise? Do we have that in the text earlier? That your son, Solomon, right, will be king after me?
With what we have. And that's always with what we have, no.
Right.
Which is interesting. I do think that's interesting, given we have this story.
Right.
That if I'm looking back through this and I go, I've got a narrative that says Solomon's supposed to become king, and I've got a line that says, you told me before, and I don't know that line, you could fix that. But they don't. They don't fix that. That doesn't get put in.
Right.
And instead, we have Bathsheba coming in and then getting backed up by Nathan.
Right.
So-
how old is David, by the way? Remember that time you told me that?
Right. So that's
right.
My
I
question.
don't like to admit when I'm 52. I don't like to remember. I don't like to, remind my kids that I can't remember certain things that I was told, and it's not setting in yet. But this is David going, oh, and then Nathan comes in, his most trusted court prophet, the one who knows things that David's trying to hide from God, and says, yeah, you said this. David's going to be like, oh, yeah, I must have said this, whether he said it or not.
Right. So then I guess my question is, if you had to pick, if you had to put your cards down and say, I'm either going with, yeah, I think that in this narrative, David said this, or is Nathan running a scam? Like, is Nathan, if I got left out and I'm trying to pick my new guy, do you think this reflects something that they think really happened? Or is this Nathan looking to protect themselves?
Good question. Can I throw in a third option?
Yeah, always.
What do they say about animals not changing their stripes over time? David acts a certain way throughout his life. And he may be losing some of his memory, and he may be getting old, and he may not be able to do some of the things that he used to do when he was young and virile and looking out and seeing a woman and saying, bring her to me. But that mentality is still there. You know what I'm saying? So there's an old joke about eunuchs, right? They know how, but they can't, right? Eunuchs are like critics, right? They know how, they just can't, right? David can't anymore, let's say, because he's old, but it's still his mentality. His mentality is still, he might still be in that mentality, meaning in his mind, he might still be thinking to himself, yeah, that's totally something I would have said to my favorite wife, Bathsheba. So whether he said it or not, them coming into him, first Bathsheba and then Nathan coming in, he's going to remember, oh yeah, she's my favorite wife. I threw it all away, or almost threw it away, over her. This is totally a promise I would have made to her, over and above the guy who's supposed to be my next oldest son. So I can totally see David saying, oh yeah, if I didn't promise that, it's totally something I would have done. And I do like you best. Yeah, I've got this electric blanket in there, but I can't do anything with her anymore. You're my favorite. This is a promise I made to you. You're right. Now, are they tricking him? I think it's a fair question to ask.
Yeah.
Are they manipulating him?
It feels, if I had to pick.
Yeah.
The manipulation side of it feels so ripe in the way that Nathan comes to her to say, he doesn't go straight into the king. Why doesn't he go straight into the king?
He did it before?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before he said, I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell you what you did. And I've got this story to help reveal things. Now he goes to Bathsheba and says, hey, you go in.
Right.
And then you tell him this. And when he talks to her, it's not hey, remember when he says, you go in and tell him this.
Right.
And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to back you up.
Yeah.
And we'll be okay. It feels ripe.
Sounds like another story.
Feels ripe for the manipulation.
It sounds like another story in the Bible, huh?
It feels like a couple.
Yeah, it could be. This is what other women do we know that had to go in to the king and say, "Hey, there's something I need to tell you."
Right. If we're looking at Esther, we were talking before about Esther, which again with that story, if I'm looking at both of these, cynically, Nathan, if I'm seeing Nathan as a political operative, which I feel like I really am today.
He is a political, let's just be honest. He's a political operative.
He's protecting himself. He sends Bathsheba in first. If I'm saying cynically, I send Bathsheba in.
Yeah.
I can gauge the response in the room to decide if I want to come in and back this line as well, or if I need to change my game plan. Yeah. Is this going to work? Like with Esther, when Esther gets sent in, she says, right, if I go in uninvited, I've got two options. I could die or I could live. But there's a downside here. There's a big downside. Nathan maybe is playing it safe. He went in before. He made it out. Is he so confident?
He could be. I mean, again, we always have to set aside the fact that this is written after the fact
Correct.
to support what actually happened. So history is written after the fact to support the thing that ultimately took place. So they're writing it so that it looks like this was all supposed to happen this way. So let's just set aside that possibility. I want to give, I guess, Nathan more benefit of the doubt and say, whether it was something that David promised or not, it's something in line with his character.
It's in line with him, I think.
And Bathsheba was his favorite wife. And he did throw a lot of it away for her. And I could totally see David wanting Solomon to be the king, especially if, and this is in a whole other debate, right? Especially if God did what he did to David with the first child. Remember this? This is, if we go back and we look at
2 Samuel
2 Samuel 12:14, we recall God is not punishing the child for the sins of the father. Remember, David and Bathsheba have this child, and Nathan comes in and he says, David is mourning. He's just mourning. The child's sick that they had, and it was 8 days, right? Mm-hmm. And he says, I'm sick to death. And Nathan comes in and he says, the Lord is going to spare you, David. He's not going to kill you for this egregious thing that you did. You committed adultery with Bathsheba. Then you had Uriah the Hittite killed, right? So the Lord's going to spare you, but the child that you had with Bathsheba will die. And David was so distraught. And then when the child actually dies, David's like, okay, this is how God's going to play this. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe David is saying, if that's what happened, if the text is accurately reporting what actually happened, maybe David's saying, okay, God, you get to do that, but you know what I'm going to do? We're going to have another child, and I'm going to make that one the king.
And we do have to note, as you said, there's some differences of opinion here.
Correct.
Because if you're listening to this, you might have read Joel Baden's book or Halpern's book on David, and they put forward the theory that maybe that story about the first child dying is similar to some of this, a way to protect what comes to be the case later. And so is it possible that first child is Solomon?
Right.
But because if Uriah was still alive when Bathsheba got pregnant, the question of whose kid is this could exist, that we need to get him off the stage. We need to have a story where that child is no longer around, and then Solomon is born from Bathsheba. So they say it could be possible.
She goes to visit some friends in Nazareth for a little while.
That maybe Solomon is that first son of David and Bathsheba, and that all of this fits together. Baden draws on this as well, that Nathan shows up in 3 big scenes connected to Solomon. That first one with David and Bathsheba, then the instruction that David's not going to build the temple, Solomon is, and now Solomon making it onto the throne. So he puts forward questions of, should we see Nathan as anything more than a plot device? Yeah,
or purely to support the monarchy of Solomon, the coronation of Solomon.
It's a question. We only have what we have.
We're just doing critical scholarship here on the text, and we're looking at all the possibilities, especially since what's going to happen in Chronicles is going to change. It's going to change. It's going to alter what we see here in Kings, but it's possible. So the question is, was Solomon always supposed to be the next in line because of some promise that David made that he forgot because he's old, and now Bathsheba and Nathan are correctly remembering David, right? They're remembering to him, hey, you made this thing, and look, Adonijah's stepping out of line here, so go fix this. Or is Adonijah doing exactly what he's supposed to doing, and Joab, the military, representing, and Abiathar, representing the priesthood, are all lining up, and all the sons are lining up, and that's what's supposed to be going on. And this is some kind of coup.
This is
on behalf of Bathsheba and Solomon and Nathan and this new
guy,
Zadok, right? This new priest, who, by the way, spoiler alert, will become the central line of the priesthood going forward from here on out. Spoiler alert, Abiathar is going to be exiled. You don't kill priests. You're not supposed to. What happened when Saul did this to the priest of Nov, right? You can't do that. So they're going to exile the priest while they off everybody else. And they exile the priest and they kill everybody else, and Solomon takes over. And it's a coup.
It ends up looking a lot like a coup.
But here's the problem with the whole coup thing before we move on. So I've been don't judge me for this. I've been reading Machiavelli's The Prince, right? I always hear reference. Machiavelli is actually the source. It wasn't Waldo, right? It was Machiavelli was the source of the one who says, if you're going to injure somebody, injure them in such a way that they can't come back and retaliate, which Waldo turned into, if you're going to come for the king, you best kill him, right? Or I'm paraphrasing, but you have to injure him in such a way that he can't, the king. If you're going to take somebody out, you got to take them out so that they can't come get revenge, which has been the history of monarchies. So if a king, if the king has 8 sons and this son comes to the throne, the rest of those sons either need to fall in line and, hey, we're going to obey you, or they need to go into exile, or they're going to get killed, because that king is going to kill everybody who could be a rival to his rule, the rival to his throne, which is what Adonijah is going to do, and it's what Solomon is going to do.
It's what Nathan tells Bathsheba, to protect your life and the life of your son. So
Solomon didn't fall in line. Solomon's not there at the party to all hail King Adonijah.
And some ask the question, is he not there at the party because he's trying to create a rival faction? Is this a rivalry between the two of them?
Right.
And that's why they already have their co-groups, and part of why Adonijah early on is trying to advance his campaign.
Right.
There's that reading that some propose. Another reading is leaning into maybe Solomon has a disputed lineage. That is he not there because he's maybe not seen as David's son, or there's a question of if he's David's son.
It's an interesting
and so he's on the outside.
It's an interesting theory that there was this knowledge that David had this affair with Bathsheba. David tried to bring Uriah the Hittite home and say, hey, well, you've been working hard. I really love you. Why don't you go sleep with your wife? You've earned it. And Uriah comes in and he says, my men are still out in the field and they're still out fighting for you, my king. I would never, ever go in, and sleep with my wife while they're out in the field. I'm with my boys, Ferda, right? And I'm out there with them. And David's like, yeah, I would really like you to go in and sleep with your wife. And he's like, no, I'm going to sleep right here on the front doorstep, right here on the mat. And David's like, okay. And this is when he plots this plan to
remove Uriah from the picture.
Yeah. Everybody charge into the city, but everybody else comes back. And so, Uriah's like, let's go get him, Ferda. And, and he goes in, and then he pulls everybody else back, and they focus their fire on Uriah, and Uriah dies. And this is all cleaned up, and nobody knows the better of it until Nathan shows up and says, no. God saw this. Now, to go back to this is Halpern's view, right? This is Maiden. They say, oh no, look, Nathan's involved, so this must be part of the larger campaign to bring Solomon to the fore.
They view it as a part of that apologetic rewrite to protect Solomon from questions of lineage concerns that looks at some of these other things when Nathan shows up, or how Solomon is left out, that maybe there's a doubt. Something they look at as well is when Solomon does come to power, right? Adonijah has the establishment behind him, as we've mentioned.
Correct.
Solomon gets not the leader of the military, but the ones with the swords. Yeah. And Solomon, if he's coming from disputed ancestry, it's with Uriah and through a line that's connected to the mighty men and to the soldiers. And so they say, is there a reason why maybe that side backs Solomon, which becomes very important because when Adonijah is out having this party, and then they hear that David has chosen Solomon and he does the anointing process, they get terrified when they find out, and the fighters are with Solomon. Yeah. And so is that a part of they have a reason to side with Solomon because maybe they've heard a story too.
They are pissed because their leader, their guy who died for them, and they want to make sure that they weren't the ones responsible for this. They are going to avenge his death. And the way that you avenge his death is you back Solomon. And this is the idea that this is the child of that, right? So you are not I get the theory.
There's pieces.
It's an enticing theory. Yeah.
There's things there. And I think the beauty, whether you want to go one way or another, of looking at the difficulties is there is so much that is problematic about David's last days and the rise of Solomon. It is not clean at all.
Right.
None of this is smooth in a way you might expect in this first real handoff from father to son for the kingship here. It's extremely messy. Before David, if we backtrack a little bit to David doing some of the choosing here, that David, after this Bathsheba and Nathan questioning, and he does say, your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and then goes to instruct Zadok and Nathan to take him out, anoint him, take him down, put him on my mule, take him to the Gihon, get him on my throne, say that long live King Solomon.
And this is, by the way, the traditional Israelite coronation ceremony. It's the equivalent of walking down Pennsylvania Avenue after you have gone up on the steps of the Capitol and taken the oath of office and given your inauguration speech, right? You put the king on the royal donkey, you march them down into the Kidron Valley, go to the Gihon Spring, you anoint them with oil, long live King David. By the way, what does Jesus do during the triumphal entry? I just like to throw this in there because we've made an entire video about it. Jesus is coming from the Mount of Olives in the east, down through the Kidron Valley, past the Gihon Spring, on a donkey. Jesus knew what he was doing. He was trying to, and he's got the Zechariah prophecy, right? He's reenacting this same thing that Solomon went through. He's trying to portray himself as the king of the Jews. So if that's what they're doing with Solomon, and David is given this order, and Adonijah is in the middle of his coronary. He's going to
have a coronary now.
Have a coronary
because he's got his party
coronation. He's having this thing where he's like, "Hey, I'm going to become the king," and these guys find out, no. He just named Solomon the king.
They all hightail it.
And let's remember, this all started with old Abishag there as the one who wasn't Bathsheba, because she's older now too. But Abishag is the young woman who's been assigned to lie with King David.
We'll come back to her in a second. Because now we have Adonijah in the panic moment.
Right.
David there's a private declaration that we're told happens with Bathsheba and Nathan where, I remember that. I'm going to go by that.
Right.
And I'm going to make your son Solomon, which I do think is an interesting way for David to say it. It goes back and forth through this when it's your son Bathsheba and when he's my son. It's not always one to one.
Why don't you read that? Let's go ahead and read it.
So in 29 through 31, the king swore, saying, "As the Lord lives, who has saved my life from every adversity, as I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, your son Solomon shall succeed me as king. He shall sit on my throne in my place. So will I do this day." Then Bathsheba bowed her face. If we go down a little bit, because that's the private part, now he says, okay, I've made this promise here. Everybody needs to know about it. In 33, the king said to them, "Take with you the servants of your Lord, have my son Solomon ride on my own mule, bring him down to the Gihon. There let the priest Zadok and the prophet Nathan anoint him king over Israel. Blow the trumpet and say, 'Long live King Solomon.' You shall go up following him. Let him enter and sit on my throne. He shall be king in my place, for I have appointed him to be ruler over Israel and over Judah." So we get the private performance and now the public anointing.
By the way, which parallels David's anointing, right? He was first anointed by Samuel in private before he ever became king, right? So he was anointed first, and then, so you have this private thing. So there's some parallel here going on. But how do you feel if you're Adonijah and you're in the mid-party and everybody, "Oh, that king," and he's, "It's good to be the king," and right, he's, and all of a sudden somebody runs in and said, "David just named Solomon," and Zadok was there, and Nathan was there, and Benaiah was there.
They're all there, and we get told in 41 that they can hear that the city is in an uproar, because unlike Absalom, who goes far away to do this, Adonijah is right there, right close to where this is going to be happening for Solomon. So we've got our factions. We had one that was kind of self-appointed. Now David doing some appointing. Nathan's plan seems to have worked fairly well for him. And Adonijah in terror, right? All the guests go their own way. Adonijah fearing Solomon, he goes and he grasps the horns of the altar in fear for his life. Because as you said, you get in line or maybe you get removed from the picture.
And explain the tradition of the grasping the horns of the altar, right? So the guests come up, the people in the city they hear, long live King Solomon. This is Hosanna, right? The son of David so this is the same thing again, to parallel the triumphal entry, right? Long live son of David, so they're coming in, they're calling him the king. Adonijah, fearing Solomon, realizing what had happened and that his own life went up and grabbed the horns of the altar, which is this symbol of mercy. If you throw yourself on the horn, remember it's a 4-horned altar, you throw yourself on the horns of the altar, this is a plea for mercy. If you do this, if you and you throw on the horns of the altar, nobody's ever going to murder you or execute you while you're begging for mercy on the horns of the altar, at the temple or so that's always been the ultimate plea for mercy.
And Solomon says, if he proves to be a worthy man, not one of his hairs shall fall to the ground, seemingly saying, I won at this moment. At this moment, Solomon is saying, I won. You've called for mercy. You're going to get mercy. Go on and be on your way. Behave well.
Go home.
And things will go well with you and go home.
It'd be a shame if something bad happened to you.
It would be a shame if something bad happens to him in the future. So if we continue going on, we now have a guy, Solomon, who, as it says, he'll be king in my place. This co-regency has kind of started. David's not dead yet. We get David's last words,
though. Not dead yet.
He's not dead yet. He has been confused at times. Right, He's been a little cold. He's been a little weak on things.
Yeah.
But before he dies, he gives Solomon some final instructions.
Right.
And we get kind of 2 sets.
Right.
The first set, the one that maybe people expect, but not all of it. He charged his son Solomon, and this is keep the charges of the Lord, walk in his ways, keep his statutes, be good, and the Lord will establish his word, right?
Very Deuteronomistic, right? Do all the things you're supposed to do.
This is the part that I think you would expect the outgoing king to say, hey, follow the rules and things are going to go well. Right. Be a good king in the eyes of God and things are going to go well.
Right.
And then before he breaks off, moreover, you know also what Joab did to me and how he dealt with. And what do you need to do to him? Act, therefore, according to your wisdom. Do not let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace. And so we get this for Joab. We get this hit list that comes through of David saying, I've got some enemies that conveniently, some of them didn't side with you either.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to do some things about them. So Joab is on this list. Shimei is on this list. That don't let them get away with the things they did. Then David slept. So his last words before he dies aren't the be a good and faithful king to the Lord. It's you got some people that you need to kill.
Here's my enemies list, by the way. And by the way, they are your enemies as well. Make sure you take care of this as soon as you get into office.
But again, David avoids here, as he's been great at doing. He doesn't kill them.
Right.
David's great at avoiding being involved in the murder. He says, here are some instructions. But it also really helps Solomon because, well, why does Solomon kill all of them? David told me to.
Well, that was the last order, the last wishes of a dying king, right? So we're gonna take care of this. We've seen this trope before, but also you do want to take out all of your rivals, anybody who can potentially rise up, the people that might side with them. You take out all possible avenues, all possible alternatives. And he does say, by the way, I want you to deal loyally with some people and let them come in to sit at the table because they helped me.
They were on my side.
Right.
Deal with them kindly.
Right.
These ones, and Joab in here is, I think, one of the surprising ones because Joab has handled a lot of dirty work for David.
Yeah.
But here, he's on the wrong side of events at the end of David's life.
And he did kill my son, by the way, when I told him not to.
He did do that.
He did do that. He left him hanging in a tree. Also, he didn't side with you. So all of this dirty stuff that I've had him do for me, at the end of the day, he didn't side with my successor, and he's going to go down for it.
Although interesting in, because it feels like the Absalom reference with how much we got here should have come in.
Yep.
But it's he dealt wrongly, right, with Abner and with Amasa.
Yeah.
Absalom doesn't get a reference as far as you've done wrong by him, which is interesting given how much Absalom.
Because Absalom, if you think about it in this context, Absalom revolted against the king.
Right.
And so he needed to go. So he's not going to fault him for doing that. But right now, Joab, you picked the wrong guy. You backed the wrong horse. And sorry, you can't do that.
And so we finally get the end of David's last days. David makes his declarations. He's tried to clean things up a little bit with the succession. Maybe it's worked. Maybe it hasn't, but he is dead. Solomon has been
find out.
Anointed king.
Yeah.
And shortly thereafter, Adonijah, the one who got told, go home, go be a good boy.
Do like the other brothers. The other brothers were going to line up behind Adonijah.
Yeah. Get in line.
Serve in the court, do what you're supposed to do, and you'll keep your head.
And Adonijah, in chapter 2, 2:15, he comes to Bathsheba.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Bathsheba playing an important role here as a mediator. He says to her, you know that the kingdom was mine and that all Israel expected me to reign. Again, returning to, was he being in a coup or was he doing what everybody expected?
Correct.
However, the kingdom has turned about and become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. And so he says, please ask King Solomon, he will not refuse you, to give me Abishag as my wife. She says, very well, I will speak to him. She goes to Solomon and says, let Abishag be given to your brother Adonijah as his wife. And Solomon's answer is, and why do you ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom as well.
Yeah.
So Bob, what's in the ask? Because we had Abishag at the beginning.
Right.
And now we have Abishag coming back in at what becomes the end of Adonijah, because King Solomon says, you're not going to marry her, and not only that, go kill him.
When I first heard this, when I was young, right? When I first heard this going up, it was like, he lost the kingdom. He lost the military commander. He lost the priesthood. He lost all of it. He lost. He thought he was going to be king, and whether he was supposed to be king or whether it was a coup took it from him, or whether he was trying to usurp the throne and it appropriately went to Solomon. Either way, he got to keep his head.
Yeah.
So he gets to live. And so what's his consolation prize? All he wants is the poor girl that had to sleep with his elderly dad. That's all he wants. He doesn't want some young prince. He doesn't want the harem. He just wants the girl that was asked to sleep with David. And again, whether he had sex with her or not, even if he didn't, because he was too old, he just wants her. Let me have her. And I was like, what's the big deal? And then I thought back to the whole sleeping with the harem out in front. This was the person who was closest to the king.
Mm-hmm.
This is the person who he can then turn around, or even worse, the people who can turn around and say, yeah, but the king's personal attendant, the one who was closest to, not Bathsheba, but the one who was closest in his old age, that's the one that came over. So it's not unlike sleeping with the harem.
Yeah.
It's not the whole harem, but this was all the harem he had left in his elder years. And that's the one that I'm going to take on as my wife.
Which is the context in here, if you're reading this removed from the value of that, which is why that setup at the beginning of he's old, he's advanced, he's not able to do anything, but we have this individual, does matter so much, because in David's last days, it affects the first days and the last days of some of these other individuals. I really like Frank Moore-Cross. He has a good line on this where he says, like, if Adonijah was stupid enough to ask for her, he deserved to die.
Yeah, right.
That if you send her here, you have to know what you're asking for, which again causes us to return to the question of, is Adonijah stupid enough to ask for this? Or is this the later efforts to say, okay, Solomon, we've got a story where Solomon says, go home, I'm not going to kill you. And then Solomon kills him.
Right.
So does Solomon go back on his word, or is there a reason?
Is there a reason, or was Solomon just going to kill him anyway? Because he's got to wipe out all of the possible alternatives, right? And they needed some kind of apologetic rationale for why Solomon would go back on his word. And so they made this play for what was essentially David's one-woman harem, which is something you just don't do. You don't sleep with the former king's harem, because if you do that, like Absalom did, you're going to die. That's an usurpation of the throne. It's an attempt. It's a public gesture.
Because Solomon's read is ask for him the kingdom as well.
Right.
In asking for her, you are asking for all of this for him. And so this leads to Solomon sending Benaniah. He strikes him down and he dies.
Right.
And so we start now Solomon acting on David's last request. The hit list begins. And so we have Adonijah is killed. Abiathar, as you mentioned, gets banished. He gets sent off to Anatoth, and that's where you're going to reside now. And Zadok handily has some more power now.
Mm-hmm.
Joab is killed. Joab, who holds onto the altar himself and calls mercy. Solomon doesn't abide by it this time.
Right.
And because
Joab are off the table for
Joab says, if you want to kill me here. And Solomon tells Benaniah, well, then give him what he wants.
Yeah.
And so Benaniah kills him, and Benaniah becomes...
Happy to oblige, yeah.
Benaniah becomes the leader of the army himself.
Correct.
A nice promotion for picking the right side. Mm-hmm. And then Shimei is placed on house arrest for 3 years until he goes to chase down some servants who left, and then he's killed. And so Solomon, over a span of time, enacts David's final words. The requests of David's last days are done. And by the end of 2, we have the king put Benaniah, son of Jedidiah, over the army, and the king put the priest Zadok in the place of Abiathar. And then 46, so the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. He has to do all of this for it to be established. He was made king already.
Right.
He was put on the throne, but it's not until they're dead.
But again, in the same way that David never killed Saul, even though the Bible records all of these opportunities that it's trying to show, look, David went out of his way not to kill Saul, even though he was essentially usurping the throne from him. Right? David is not Saul's son. That's Jonathan. But he marries into the family with Michal. He's anointed by Samuel. Look at all these opportunities, and now he's always flaunt these things. Like, I cut off the back of your thing while you were in the cave, and I put this sword next to your head while you were sleeping. They highlight all the facts, and then when the guy does. When Saul does ask this guy to run him through when he's mortally wounded, David has the guy killed for following directions. So David never kills all those people, right? David never kills Saul, even though he has the chance. In the same way, Solomon, we have these stories, this collection of stories, where Solomon had mercy on all these people who rebelled against him, but they did things that brought about their own death.
Yeah.
Not Solomon.
So it's protecting Solomon's legacy while securing him. It's protecting David's legacy while securing him.
Right.
It's an extremely messy story of David's last days, but it works really well to protect the people who end up in power. Or maybe it doesn't work so well because then Chronicles comes in and says, we're just going to say Control-Alt-Delete. And we have Solomon is given the plans for the temple, and he's going to be king, and we're all good.
Yeah.
And it just gets simplified.
Much cleaner.
It's much, much cleaner. Far less entertaining, though.
No, it's not palace intrigue. It's just this is the way it was always going to be part of God's plan.
It was always the plan for Solomon to be next. You read Kings, though, maybe things are a little less clear.
Yeah, and then again, we get back to the question was, who was supposed to be the king?
So who, at the end of all of this, does the right guy end up on the throne?
Because Solomon ends up being kind of an ass as a king, right?
Solomon could have been better. So
the Bible doesn't have nice things to say about Solomon as king, and he allowed some things like the idolatry and the 300 concubines, or
we get, I think, in the public memory of Solomon. The Solomon that most of us think of or know is the wise Solomon, the one who's deciding things, which is a very small part of Solomon's narrative.
Right.
We get a Solomon that is kind of in 3 parts that some people argue about, where you've got this murderer Solomon up front. Is he usurping? Is he coup? Is he rightful? Whatever it is, it's really pro-monarchic. It's really bloody.
Right. Then you've got the pro-monarchic stuff.
Then you've got
he's the Queen of Sheba, and he's
cutting
a baby in half, but not.
He asks for wisdom. All of the stuff that's the good Solomon, and then you get the fall of Solomon.
Right. Where they're basically saying he's a pharaoh.
Where he does everything he shouldn't have done.
Right.
And so, is he the right one to end up on the throne, or should it have been Adonijah?
And then it's after that the North says, we're not going to do this anymore. and Rehoboam's an idiot.
We've had it with you.
Yeah. And so then we asked the question, was it ever truly a united kingdom? David had to force the tribes of the north after slaughtering everybody who could be a rival. So the tribes of Judah, where David was from, they anointed him. But then it took 3 years. It took a while for 3 months. I forget. It took some time for David then to be anointed king over the tribes of Israel. And then when Solomon comes in, we're not quite sure what went on there.
Yeah.
But Solomon became king. It wasn't good, although the Bible portrays it as this vast, glorious, rich, wealthy kingdom. And then by the time Solomon's dead, the kingdoms are split again.
And Solomon fixes some of the complications from David's wrestling things together, like having Abiathar and Zadok. That was one of his accommodations to try to get everybody together. And Solomon looks at that and says, it could be more efficient. I could centralize a little bit more, and I get one of you.
Or was this Abiathar and Zadok a device after the fact to introduce the priesthood of Zadok?
We don't have enough time to get into that today.
Somebody should write a dissertation.
Somebody should look at that, of whether, Abiathar getting exiled and Zadok coming in matters at all in Chronicles. But for that, you can wait around for a little while.
By the way, fun fact, which prophetic line comes out of Abiathar? It's the ones who hate the monarchy and have the worst things to say about them. It's Jeremiah.
Yeah.
So Jeremiah, if you remember, comes out of Anatote, and he's the one going back into the kings saying, you guys, I may have gotten booted, my family may have gotten booted out, but we still have some things to say about what's going on here in Jerusalem. And Jeremiah becomes this weeping prophet because he says all of this thing about the monarchy, instead of, including, by the way, you really ought to listen to what these Babylonians are saying, right? And nobody listens to Jeremiah, and he gets preserved because of all this. So out of this exiled priest, Abiathar, you get the Jeremiah tradition, which is an interesting little side note.
So there they are, the last days of David, which closes a chapter, and as you've mentioned right now, opens up so many more. So if there's questions we didn't get to from this, send us an email, put it down in the comments. Yeah. Be in touch. If there's other theories you've heard, there's a lot to say about the end of David and the start of Solomon, and we can come back to the last days of some of these other individuals in the future. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you find us. It really helps us. Right. Hopefully it helps you keep in touch with us and all the things that we're doing. Yeah. But for today, I think let's let David lie in peace, maybe. But for all of us here at Bible and Archaeology, I'm Jordan. For Bob, thanks for tuning in. Until next time.